Hello, we are absolutely thrilled to be back together for our 2023 LiterARTure season with our theme of Girls Gone Rogue. Let me start off with a bit of history and what to expect today. In 2016, this amazing woman, Cindy Edelman, who's with me today, and I, by the way, my name is Stacey Goldring, we met drawn together because we both hold PhDs in professional lamentation. Susan Edelman, Cindy's sister-in-law, recognized our common meltdowns and made an introduction. We both were spinning about our world's, our country's crumbling civility.
So Stacey and I recognize that artists and authors create works of art that invite everyone anywhere to enter and to explore. And we just decided to follow their lead. LiterARTure stands as an open invitation, offering everyone and anyone the opportunity to learn about artists and authors and their works and how their art and lives reflect who we are as Americans. This program and space and time is reserved for you. In here, have some lunch, learn and connect with other people. Seated next to you are people who appreciate the universality of the creative mind. And I've never met a more creative mind than Stacey Goldring. I'll just say that. I can't think of a better way to spend the next hour. LiterARTure, the LiterARTure experience is a first step toward reestablishing our common bonds. And furthermore, LiterARTure is a searching for identities public program. 100% of its proceeds benefit the nonprofit. Please find out how you can underwrite LiterARTure and learn more about searching for identity at searchingforidentity.org. Meantime, we extend our deepest appreciation to the ever wonderful Nina Waters and the dear Latrice Wright of the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida, and for allowing us to use this space. And we couldn't be more grateful.
Now, please enjoy your lunch as we dive in for the first program of our Girls Gone Rogue season. We've come a long way, baby.
It wasn't challenging for me to find an artist to pair with Stacey's book collection, The Group. I fell hard for this person's work last fall. You must wait a minute or two to find out who edged out Anselm Kiefer and Rembrandt on my list of favorite artists. It isn't the individual on the slide. How many of you have ever heard of the hard-driving macho man Jackson Pollock, aka Jack the Dripper? Thank you. Pictured on the screen in ripped, paint-stained jeans. Did you know Life magazine anointed him the greatest living painter in the United States in August of 1949, just by asking the question? We're looking at a couple of pages here of Life magazine focused on Pollock's contributions to the art world. It is important to place Pollock in the context of today's story due to his being the quintessential gestural abstractionist. Primarily because the artist we will be exploring is also an abstract expressionist. And abstract expressionism was the first major American avant-garde art style and movement to emerge in New York City immediately following World War II. And it was developed by American painters in the 40s and 50s and characterized by gestural, expressive, dramatic brushstrokes, large size or large scale canvases, often found on the floor, too big for an easel. And they had non-objective imagery with no clear focal point. In other words, no part of the painting was any more or less important than another. And the use of commercial paint, because a lot of these artists were struggling and didn't have the means to afford, the very best oil paint. And so all of those factors combine to show the artist's inner feelings. There are actually feelings involved in these works, and lots of passion. Okay, next. Let me introduce you to my girl crush. Her name is Joan Mitchell. You see her in her early 30s on the right. already established in New York as someone to be reckoned with. And on the left, a very dynamic dancing Jackson Pollock flinging paint on a large mural-sized canvas on the floor, no less. Needless to say, the Renaissance gods were not amused by this kind of painting. Immensely driven to create powerful works of art, intensely self-destructive individuals, Pollock and Mitchell were both angry rebels, which seems on the surface contradictory, right? As they produce paintings of so much beauty, especially Mitchell, we'll see in a minute. Both suffered from ruinous relationships due to their addiction to alcohol, to nicotine, and hard, let me just say again, hard living. Neither were very nice people. Pollock died in an automobile accident, car-related, at 44, killing a friend of his. Let me just put it to you this way. He died in a car accident while driving his mistress and a friend of hers. It was her friend who died. And Mitchell, too, possessed many demons and turned her back on everything from her very privileged earlier life. Next, please. When I say the phrase women in the 1960s, what comes to your mind? What kinds of lives did many of them pursue? You may think of your mothers, or recall women on television shows like Donna Reed or Harriet Nelson. I loved Harriet Nelson, or Mrs. Cleaver, June Cleaver. Remember them? They were homemakers, they were hostesses, wives, mothers, and they were polite. They were perennially stuck in the kitchen with their aprons on, with their immaculate hair and makeup, with flawless homes, and of course, idyllic families. These descriptions do not even slightly resemble Joan Mitchell, uber cantankerous artist who arrived in New York around the same time as the Life magazine article. She of the I hate nature and I don't like Monet renown. Today, we're going to focus our lens on Mitchell, an abstract expressionist, someone who most definitely was not one of those 1960s girls of the Mary McCarthy novel, but a woman ahead of her time, a woman who gave up everything, I mean everything, for her art, someone whose lens on abstract expressionism added beauty and added luminosity and the most brilliant colors that you could possibly imagine to these very large scale canvases. Someone, though, who only until recently did art critics and scholars apply the word greatness. And when describing her almost 50-year career, someone whose story and paintings I personally find fascinating. Here she is sitting with two of her well-known contemporaries, her gal pals, Helen Frankenthaler in the middle, and Grace Hardigan, who's in the foreground. And notice that Joan Mitchell is on the far left, and she is, of course, holding a cigarette. I could make this counting the cigarettes part of the game today, but I'll try to refrain my juvenile self from doing that. Now, before we take a deep dive into Mitchell's life and her art, we're going to view a recent Sunday morning segment that features several of her paintings up close and personal, and you'll get a better sense of the kind of painter she was. And it's not very long, but trying to show her work on a slide doesn't even do justice to her at all. So we'll turn on Sunday morning and we'll see a good close-up of her painting.
20th century painter Joan Mitchell, Rita Braver, is our guide.
Perhaps if I hadn't had to fight, I would have quit. I don't know. I doubt it, though.
Joan Mitchell's work may have been born out of struggle, but there's no question that she was able to prevail, creating paintings now considered 20th century masterpieces.
Her work is strong, muscular, declarative, aggressive. It is everything that abstract expressionism thought that it wanted to be.
And Katie Siegel, who co-curated this show for the Baltimore Museum of Art, says that it is in part an effort to place Mitchell in the pantheon of other abstract expressionists who exploded onto the New York art scene in the 1950s. She was one of several important women artists who exhibited at that time. Yet it seems like it was the men who got all the attention. Mm-hmm. Why was that?
Well, it's not rocket science to figure out why. It's just plain old sexism.
Still, Joan Mitchell always charted her own course. She was born in 1925 to a well-to-do Chicago family. Her father, a doctor, and her mother, the editor of a poetry magazine.
She did athletics. She was a champion ice skater. She went to the symphony. She went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and it was a life of culture.
It seems like she developed an early interest in both art and poetry. And when she was 11 years old, her father told her she had to choose one.
Yes. And
is that true?
It is true. And he said, you have to be great at something. You can only do that one thing. And she chose.
Mitchell would never look back. While her early work was figurative, by the time she was 25 and living in New York, she was moving further into abstraction.
And she paints Figure in the City in 1950. And she said, I knew that would be my last figure. And it was.
In 1959, she moved to Paris, where she made increasingly larger works. A decade later, she bought a country estate where the French impressionist Claude Monet had once painted. How has her work evolved by this time?
I mean, for one thing, that idea that she uses all colors, the full spectrum, has really developed here, and a really amazing use of white that it just lights up the painting.
Would she have been okay for me to say, it's gorgeous?
Yes, she was not afraid of beauty, unlike most people in her generation. And as she said, I'm not of the make it ugly school.
Mitchell was described as both charming and cantankerous. Her love life was tumultuous. A heavy drinker and smoker, she suffered from depression. And often traveling between France and the US, she said she always felt like an outsider.
In France, I'm an American gestural painter, which is, and the lyric on top of it, very pejorative. And here I'm Frenchy because I have color and decorative. Ooh, see, you can't win, honey. And on top of it all, I'm a girl, woman, female.
He's a painter.
However Mitchell thought she was seen, artists like Stanley Whitney, 20 years younger, acknowledged her influence. What did you want to learn from her?
The freedom, and I wanted the color, and I wanted the space, the timing of it, the rhythm of it.
And he says that works like Sunflowers show how skilled Mitchell became.
It's magical how much she gets done by just making a mark. She knows so much about painting that she has total freedom to do whatever she wants.
Joan Mitchell never got to see the prices of her work skyrocket. Blueberries sold for $16.6 million in 2018. She died of lung cancer in 1992 at age 67.
Even though she died early, that's almost 5 decades of painting, but also the model of a life lived incredibly intensely. If art was at the center of her life, life is really at the center of her art.
Okay, we've just seen, next please, we've just seen these images in the Sunday morning segment, and I want to add a little more spice to Mitchell's upbringing. Surely she was a daughter of wealth and privilege, born in 1925 to a highly cultured, upper-class Chicago family. Her father, James Mitchell, was a dermatologist, apparently an authority on, of all topics, syphilis. He even treated the famous Al Capone. And her mother, Marion Strobel Mitchell, was the daughter of the engineer who built the steel bridges across the Chicago River. And she was a lyric poet in her own right, as well as an editor of Poetry magazine. And it was her mother who introduced Joan to a veritable who's who of American literary greats at their dinner table, including, it's just so, it just is mind-boggling, including Carl Sandburg, Robert Frost, Thornton Wilder, and Edna St. Vincent Millay. That would have been some dinner party, right? Anyway, Joan is seen in this slide on the far right reading. She had her first published poem at the age of 10. And as far as her father, at the time of her birth, he was hoping for a boy. There was already an older daughter in the family, and so he wanted a boy. And we know he wanted a boy because he had written the name John on her birth certificate prior to learning that John was indeed a baby girl. So he scratched out the H and added an A, excuse me. And according to many sources, he was really a cruel, demanding taskmaster, always after her to excel, whether it was in school or performing in various athletic endeavors. Now, Joan Mitchell was nicknamed by her family Bullet Head. She excelled in figure skating. In high school, she was nationally ranked. You can see she's doing a twirl there in the lower left-hand slide. She also played tennis. She rode horseback, and she was a diver. And according to her, this constant competitiveness, quote, made her a social outcast. And as a result, she developed an angry defiance, including using foul language, end quote. And, this is these quotes that I'm giving you are taken from an interview that the Smithsonian conducted between Linda Nochlin and Joan Mitchell. And you can look it up online it's many pages, but anyway, it's very interesting. So constantly challenging her and forbidding her to show any sign of fear, Jimmy Mitchell was the one who insisted that she choose which area, poetry or art, to be great. And some people think that because he was an artist, he really encouraged that she choose art as opposed to poetry. Next. Now, we know that abstract art is challenging to show in slide form and even more challenging to comprehend. We know that. I mean, I've taken plenty of art history parents on tours to New York City, and we stand in front of abstract paintings and they go, please explain what this is. And so here's a useful way to consider abstract painting, is to think about it as we think of music without words. Everyone's, heard Aaron Copland music, Rodeo, or Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. And so if you think about them, in a sense, what an abstract painting is asking us to do is to be satisfied with the composition, with the colors, with the brushwork and the tonalities, the way that we're satisfied with notes and rhythms and harmonies and music. Music doesn't always need words, right? And paintings don't always need to represent something or anything. They can simply be, it can be itself. I mean, surely many paintings in this particular case represent feelings or sensation or memories of the artist, but we'll get to that momentarily. So I hope that helps you better able to enter abstract work going forward. And that was a really wonderful idea from Dr. Stephen Zucker of the Khan Academy. Now, even though she chose art, Mitchell would carry her love of poetry her entire life. And among her favorites, she really admired the French poet Charles Baudelaire. Now, Baudelaire is really quite an important figure in the 19th century because it was Baudelaire who insisted to the Impressionist painters that they paint modern life. So he had such a tremendous impact and influence on them. And it really, of course, how isms work. Impressionism led into post-impressionism, which led into lots of other isms, which are under the umbrella of modernism, and then ultimately abstract expressionism. And there were other poets, contemporary poets, who were friends with many of the artists, including Frank O'Hara, who was actually a poet and at one point a security guard at MoMA. That just always boggles one's mind. And another named John Ashbery. And those two poets, their styles can be likened to the abstract expressionist painters. Now we're looking at a painting Mitchell made in response to a Frank O'Hara poem, even though the title of it makes you think of Beethoven. It's really called Ode to Joy, which was the name of a poem. And it's supposed to show a few moments in a speaker's life as he walks around New York. And we're not really going to dwell on this too long, but I just wanted to give you a sense of when we say her painting is like akin to poetry, this is an example. And according to Patricia Albers, who wrote one of the biographies of Joan Mitchell, she says that this poem and then, stretch it or carry it a little further to this painting is in praise of erotic love as a means of flouting or scorning death. And anyway, if we had an art history class, we could go into this, but we're going to move on. But here's the thing. Critics have inferred that her paintings were derived from poems. She, in fact, stated this, that she wanted in her art, quote, the feeling in a line of poetry, end quote. Okay, next, please. Now, Mitchell was accorded many influences on her artistic path. An early one included a regular visit with her dad, I might add, to the Art Institute of Chicago. If you've never been there, it's like, it's art heaven. You can see that she would have seen these works, the Monet, the Van Gogh self-portrait, and the Matisse interior scene. And after high school, her father decided that she was too young to go to art school. So he shipped her off to Smith College in Massachusetts, where she was miserable, returning because all she wanted to do was make art. She returned to Chicago after 2 years, eventually finishing her BFA, and then several years later, her MFA at the Art Institute. In 1950, upon graduating from her BFA, she won a traveling fellowship where she could choose anywhere to travel and study, and she chose Paris. But post-war conditions prevented her from going for several years. Another Chicago influence was Lake Michigan. It really inspired her, especially the blue in Lake Michigan. She says this about Lake Michigan: I paint, quote, I paint from remembered landscapes that I carry with me and remembered feelings of them. I never mirror nature. So keep that in mind. She never mirrors nature. That's not her intention. And she says, I would more like to paint what it leaves with me. So if she sees something beautiful, she might sketch it, but she never goes plein air like Monet did. She never took her paints out of doors and painted with, the reflections and the different times of the day and the way the light hits on the landscape. All right, next, please. Now, I wanted to show you just quickly an example of one of her early works. It was from the late 40s. And I would give an award if someone could come up with the artist that this painting should remind you of. And if I only have just a short time, so I'm just going to tell you myself, of course. Or Stacey, you already know what this is. Yes?
Yeah, it's the artist is first name on, last name titled. No.
You don't know?
How am I going to know a banjo player? What is it, Picasso?
Okay, this is Pablo. It should remind you. This is Joan Mitchell. This is an example of her work. So it's Cubist, and so a lot of the abstract expressionists, started off in their careers mimicking Picasso. Anyway, this I put this in because you can just see the leaps that she makes when she gets to France.
But that is not Picasso on the banjo.
No. But the Picasso did many musicians. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay.
Sorry.
After moving to New York in the late 40s, Mitchell saw her first Willem de Kooning on the left at the new opened Whitney Museum. Whitney Museum opened downtown in 1931. And the painting is called Abstraction. And she was stunned by what she saw. She saw these vigorous, robust canvases, and that forced her to really consider adopting a freer style, a more immediate style of painting. And also that with abstraction, there were so many possibilities in that an artist could pursue. And then further, she gleaned that painting could accommodate her feelings, whether they were emotional feelings or physical feelings of various subjects, or whether it was a bridge, or whether it was the weather, or whether it was an urban space. And that made a strong impact on her as well. And she often spoke about feeling. And she said a painting with feeling embodied a largeness of purpose, to encounter the world with honest emotion and sensation. And I think that's really critical when you consider her later work. It's really about, she was unstintingly honest. And you get that sense when you stand in front of her canvas. She understood that feeling was also the driver of a grand art historical tradition that she wanted to be included in. And that included Monet and Van Gogh and Cézanne and de Kooning. And then on the right, someone like a Franz Klein. And speaking of him, this is his work Chief from 1950. And the Chief was the name of a locomotive that he remembered from his Pennsylvania childhood. He just loved the railroad. I mean, little boys love the railroad, right? They love trains and so forth. And his works look simple, but they're really very well ordered. And here's his process. He would take, he sketched an image, and then he would abstract it, right? He abstracted a train, and then he would project it onto a wall. And that would transform the simple lines that he had drawn into these magnified abstract forms, reproducing them on a canvas. And here in the vertical orientation of the canvas, it's combined with this dynamic tension with the numerous horizontals. I mean, even if you didn't know it was about a train, because I already told you, but if you look at the two lines, especially the two lines that are going in the upper right corner, and then the two lines that are going straight down toward the foreground of this picture, you can get this sense of a work, of a machine, that the lines imply speed and they imply power as they kind of rush off the picture plane. And Klein claimed to paint not what I see, but the feelings aroused in me by looking. And so I specifically picked de Kooning and Klein because they had such a tremendous impact on Joan Mitchell. Now, next, please. Now, along with de Kooning and Klein and Pollock, Mitchell became, and there she is just, getting loved up by Klein. She became a regular at the Cedar Tavern, the infamous downtown bar, the site of regular brawls and conversations of the white male-dominated crowd of artists known for their late nights, their carousing, their heavy, heavy drinking, their smoking, and their cursing. And just like them, Joan held her own. And she was one of the handful of women that were asked to join their club. Okay, they had a club where they met to talk about trends in art and philosophy of art and philosophy in general and so forth. And they had guest speakers. And so she really enjoyed being part of the male conversation. And she had her first one-woman show at the age of 26 in 1952. But here's the thing. She, Frankenthaler, Hartigan, Krasner, and Elaine de Kooning, who was Willem de Kooning's first wife, they all painted about the same time as the men, but they were labeled second gen. And none of them were in my art history Vanderbilt text, Jansen's History of Art, that tome that only really had maybe two women, one of whom was Mary Cassatt, and the other, maybe it was Georgia O'Keeffe. But as the sixth edition, only Krasner and Frankenthaler were in. So, I mean, again, I just want to make the point that as hard as she worked and kept up, and and she was always labeled a woman artist, and she wanted to be an artist just like they did. All right. Eventually heading to Paris on her fellowship, falling in love with everything French painting, French landscape, French cafes, and a French-Canadian modernist painter married with 3 children, Jean-Paul Riopel, who was hugely influential on her thinking and work. And here they are having some kind of discussion, probably with cigarettes and alcoholic beverages, and with whom she lived for over 20 years until he ran off with her dog walker. There are many personal stories of their toxic relationship, their altercations, especially after nights of significant alcohol consumption, but we're not going to talk about any of them. Let's go to the next. And although, and here's a picture of her in a photograph of her in her Paris studio around 1956. I just wanted to mention here that she changed, and you heard this in the CBS segment, she changed her palette when she moved to France, and she added deeper greens and deeper pinks and this blue color that I wanted you to see. It's called cerulean blue. Cerulean means resembling the blue of the sky. It's such a great word. And that's the color highlighted. And the blues reminded her of Lake Michigan, although I doubt Lake Michigan ever looked that pretty, and would grow to include the River Seine. And even she said the Hudson and the East River in New York, were keepers or symbols of stored memory. And also her work became more panoramic in France. Always a carefully structured painter, she worked from mental images, and she applied paint with tremendous energy and, no surprise, with an athleticism. She worked slowly, deliberately, listening to Bach or other classical composers. And she used a variety of brushes, some of them dry, some of them she swiped with paint, she slathered paint, she dripped paint. She even rubbed her fingers or rags with paint. Next slide, please. So prior to 1959, Mitchell lived like a gypsy, shuttling back and forth between New York and France, finally settling in Paris. After 8 years, she really wanted to go live in the countryside. And soon after, 8 years after she moved, her mother passed away, and Mitchell inherited the means to buy some property in a little town called Vitoy, which is approximately 11 miles from Giverny. Now, Vitoy, the property she bought was called La Tour, or the Tower. There's a tower on the property. Remember La Tour Eiffel, for those of you who studied French? Okay, the tower. And the Vitoy was about 37 miles northwest of Paris. And so this is where she moved, and this is where she would spend the remainder of her life, of course, going back and forth to work with museums in New York and with other art dealers and co-creators. She did some works on paper in New York. Okay, next, please. And I just want to furthermore say that Vitoy is on the border of Normandy. So we're going north and west of Paris, and it's beautifully situated on. In fact, there's the tower in the photo of Mitchell standing in a sea of sunflowers. It's beautifully situated on this River Seine, and it also is interesting. You may find this interesting. I did that the Vitoy, the town where she lived, was in the art historical pantheon of locations due to its pedigree. You already know that Monet painted there. What CBS didn't tell you was he actually lived there for about a year in a shed, a little space on the property. But Renoir, John Singer Sargent, the American painter, the expat, and Vincent van Gogh all painted in Vitoy. And in fact, Monet, as I said, lived in a small building on the larger, on her larger property. And you can actually see, there are many paintings actually of that Monet did of Vitoy. On the right, you can see one of his children, a couple of children that are running through fields of sunflowers. And Riopelle planted this giant sunflower patch, which sunflowers, as we'll soon see, are among her favorite subjects to paint. Okay, next, please. Now, here's just a little insight into her studio. What I thought was fascinating was that she covered the windows when she painted, and she also, you can see how she stacked up canvases with their backs to her. So she might have had ADD, who knows, where she just didn't want to be distracted by anything else when she was working. And notice how she's turned many of them against the wall. And also the other thing that was really interesting was at one point when she starts doing larger scales rather than the diptych you see here. Diptych is 2 panels. When she does triptychs or quadritychs, she could not paint them all at one time. And so she would put 1 or 2 away, depending on what state she was in. And because she had this incredible memory, she was known to have made this segue or the transition from one to another just seamless. I mean, she really was brilliant. She was a brilliant artist. Also, I couldn't resist. I'm a dog lover. She's got her dog Iva, her German Shepherd, pictured in the slide, almost looking like she's posing. And Mitchell said many times that she preferred pets to people. That kind of gives you a little more insight into what she was like. And next, according to the curators of the most recent Joan Mitchell shows, Katie Siegel and Sarah Roberts, quote, as an artist and as a woman, Mitchell rejected social conformity and saw herself as a weed, a dandelion, a daisy, a sunflower, any plant that was taken for granted and seen as unruly or out of place. It's just so perfect. If we consider this quote and we move to the toy, it helps us understand her fascination with sunflowers and her driving need to paint them. We discussed earlier her admiration for Van Gogh's paintings, sunflower paintings. Both artists were influenced by the French countryside, his in Arles, hers in Vitoy. Both made multiple sunflower images. Their paintings were understood by the artists as a means to sustain a sense of promise. Van Gogh anticipated Gauguin moving to his yellow house. That's why he painted his sunflower paintings. Mitchell commented tersely of hers, quote, "It's a yellow painting. There's hope," end quote. According to scholars who mounted an exhibit of Mitchell's sunflowers, she viewed Van Gogh's precedent as a challenge to herself. The viewer feels his hand in her brushwork deliberate, which asserts its independence from otherworldly things. On the left is one of Van Gogh's iconic paintings, one of several iterations. Like Mitchell, Van Gogh is a strong communicator, a dazzling colorist, and was an irascible human being. Most of the sunflowers in Van Gogh's painting are dead, reminding us of our own mortality. The paint is applied thickly, giving it a rich texture. For the most part, Van Gogh was self-taught, so when it came to applying the paint on the canvas, we know that he would squeeze the paint from the tube directly on the canvas and often use the end of the brush to score the paint. Mitchell explained her attraction to sunflowers in an interview with philosopher and art critic Yves Michaud. Quote, "Sunflowers are something I feel very intensely. They look so wonderful when they're young, and they're so very moving when they're dying. I don't like fields of sunflowers. I like them alone, and of course, painted by Van Gogh." Okay. All right. In closing, we're going to talk about the other huge influence on Mitchell, and that would be one very famous Monet. Born 1 year after Monet's death, Mitchell has many connections to the father of Impressionism. They carried on a dialogue that included loving abstraction as a painting style, along with sharing similar approaches to color in all its intensities, and as it related to light, gestural freedom with their brushes and large-scale canvases. Their conversation also reflected loving nature, including gardens like Giverny, and particular flowers, whether water lilies, like you see on the left, and this is a detail from the Nymphaea of Monet, painted at Giverny, and sunflowers, as well as you've already heard, they shared the same landscape. Importantly, both artists imitated nature, transcribing sensations, and in doing so, they searched to merge the sensation. They merged emotion and they merged reminiscences, especially through, quote, the right arrangement of colors. Mitchell had seen Monet's water lilies, the late work, when cataracts had clouded his eyes. He had an early cataract surgery, by the way, evidenced by his highly gestural brushwork, and there's no perspective whatsoever in his in his final works. Mitchell also used free brushwork. You will see she added dipping effects here, sometimes alternating between condensed and opaque areas sometimes using thick paint with delicate transparencies, as you see on the fourth panel on the right on this couture for Betsy Jolis. The white is just stunningly beautiful. Like Mitchell said, if I don't feel it, I don't paint it. Now, in closing, I want to share a quote that was in the catalog of the Joan Mitchell. You can just show that painting; it's so beautiful. This quote is in the catalog of the recent Joan Mitchell shows at San Francisco Museum of Art, at the Baltimore Museum, and at the Foundation Vuitton in Paris. And it's from Katie Siegel and Sarah Roberts. I quote, "History is full of women overlooked, difficult, unloved, forgotten, unrealized, overshadowed. Whether Joan Mitchell was all or many of the above mentioned descriptions, she was first and foremost, without qualification, a great artist, and she never aspired to anything less than that." Thank you.
Your topic is so timely. Do you want to make any comment on what appeared in the New York Times yesterday?
Yes, apparently the Foundation Vuitton had written to the Joan Mitchell Foundation asking if they could use a couple of the paintings from the most recent exhibition in their ads, and they said, unalterably a big fat no. And now, what is it about no they didn't get? I'm not sure, but now the Joan Mitchell Foundation is bringing a suit against the Foundation Vuitton. Not so smart. Copyright infringement on copyright.
You think they knew you were going to talk about her?
I don't know, but you just love it because it's just so you were able to match the slides together so well. I'm very proud of you.
Technical expertise never stops. Cindy, thank you so much for bringing to light the life and work of the artist Joan Mitchell. She is the perfect inspiration for our Girls Gone Rogue theme. Thanks to you, we can finally recognize that she has indeed come a long way, baby. Moving from canvas to page, I am pleased to talk about Mary McCarthy and the consequences of her bestseller, The Group. I can't remember exactly who told me about The Group, and it's a shame because I owe them an infinite amount of gratitude. However, there is a very, very good chance that I bought this book solely based on its cover. Full disclosure. Since discovering The Group some years ago, I've been eager to discuss it. Happily, I had that opportunity just a few months ago, and I feel doubly fortunate to revisit the novel with you today. Honestly, McCarthy's beautiful writing style, her incredible characters and plot, plus the book's powerful themes have stayed with me. Why? The Group offers me strength, comic relief, and context. It also serves as a cautionary tale. Shuffling through my mountains of notes in preparation for today, I found a list I created of interesting facts about McCarthy's life, and I'm going to share this with you with the disclaimer that intellectual it is not. So here is the list of important facts, and it reads as follows verbatim. Smart. 4 husbands plus affairs, exclamation point. Thought all feminists were shiny, greedy, and shrill. Disliked by Lillian Hellman is an understatement. Okay, this does deserve an explanation because no love was ever lost between playwright Lillian Hellman and our Mary McCarthy. So here's the backstory, sure to illustrate McCarthy's personality for you. Hellman and McCarthy's animosity went back to their college days, spawned by a disagreement having to do with poetry. Some people are quite sensitive. Anyway, you remember the Dick Cavett show? Well, in 1969, the feud Mach 2 was reunited right there on the show. It was there that Mary accused Helen of being a liar and an overrated writer. This was on PBS. So to be clear, Cavett was feeling a little cheeky with his questions, and he dared to ask McCarthy, a woman with a reputation that could slice and dice anything it didn't like, to name overrated authors. And here's what happened next, according to Dick. Quote, she answered the question, mentioning John Steinbeck, Perlbuck, and finally Lillian Hellman, quote, who I think is tremendously overrated, a bad writer, a dishonest writer, but she really belongs in the past. So Cavett asked, well, what's dishonest about her? Everything, McCarthy replied, smiling. I said once in some interview that every word she writes is a lie, including and the. Ooh. Well, yes, Hellman sued. However, she died before the case went to trial. The famous feud was recounted on Broadway in 2002. The play, entitled Imaginary Friends, was written naturally by Nora Ephron, who will get to know better if you've reserved your space for April's program, Revenge. But I digress. For the first time of many, I'm sure. So back to my list, I also have on it that Norman Mailer challenged her to a boxing match. She was brilliant, she was beautiful, and finally got her suits from Bonwit Teller. So like I said, this is not the most intellectual take on Mary McCarthy. Nonetheless, do not be deceived by my People magazine mentality. McCarthy's life and the group hit deep and are deeply personal, revealing as much about McCarthy as it does about you, me, and our culture. It's easiest to meet the group just as our reader would. In the very first chapter of the book, the stage is set and we are at a wedding in a beautiful church in New York City. Picture that we're seated on the bride's side. Just a few pews ahead of us sits the group. 8 Vassar class of 33 alums. Meet Lakey, Helena, Dottie, Pokey, Libby, Pris, Polly, and Kay. With these names, I am already hooked. From their body language, we can see they've got opinions. Mary entices us as the reader to metaphorically bend over and bend an ear, maybe appear to fumble for a mint in your purse or pocket. Whatever your excuse, you want to know what they are saying, and McCarthy does not disappoint. Who would have thunk it? What perfect pets they look. Not too bad, says the other, except for the shoes. If the fabulous names didn't hook you, this exchange surely would. It's familiar, it's real, and we've been a party to or a subject of this type of sociological observation. From this nuptial intro, the plot is put into motion, structured by voice. For 7 years post-Vassar, we follow the lives of the group, each chapter dedicated to one member. Each felt a need to distinguish herself, attain identity separate from college and their parents, and they believed they were a different breed. All planned to work in a time when it was more common to have the expectation of marriage, and in that way, you contribute to society. In the time we have, it is impossible to fully flesh out each character. And if you had the opportunity to torture yourself and watch the 1966 film by the same name, directed by Sidney Lumet, you are scarred for life. And nothing I can say can repair you from the damage of seeing that film. But I will try to restore the dignity of the book's characters by briefly introducing you to the members of the group. It was Kay Leland Strong you saw on the altar. The bride is an outsider from the Midwest who pins her existence on one man, the groom named Harold with an A. And you can imagine by his personality, by figuring out what the A stands for. As her married name implies, Kay Strong is determined to make it in the Big Apple. But what is the cost for upholding this strength? Chapter 1 ends with an underwhelming reception where the group's members all share their effusive congratulations to the bride and groom while separately continuing to offer judgy commentary, all in the best interest of their friend. Yes, the group itself is a character, its expectations powerful and oppressive. Subsequent chapters are devoted to each group member, But critics say it is the second chapter of the group that was responsible for the book's notoriety. And although plainly titled Chapter 2, I have renamed it Deflowering of Betty Renfrew and Flying Dutch Caps. Dottie wants to be a social worker, but before embarking on her career, she has personal business to attend. 2 nights after Kay and Harold with an A's wedding, she decides it's time for her sexual initiation into the world. And this is accomplished with a character aptly named Dick Brown.
God.
For Congress with Dick. Laying in bed, she reflects on the past episode with scientific objectivity a la Masters and Johnson. Dick's postcoital prescription includes persuading Dottie to get a diaphragm. He tells her that things could be a lot better between them if she would only go and see a lady doctor. He explains his birth control choices are dictated by demographics. Diaphragms for upper class women and condoms for the lower class.
Oh my God.
Telling insight about society's views on class, race, and prejudice are injected expertly into our characters' voices throughout the book. No narrator is needed. So Dottie consults with her friend Kay for 2 reasons. A, she's the married woman, and Dottie cannot go home to Massachusetts to ask her mother because birth control there was illegal. So she and Kay make their way to the Manhattan gyno. Procuring the proper diaphragm requires a good fit. And here's something I didn't know about these devices, also known as the Dutch cap. The etymology we don't have time for today. Anyways, chapter 2 was quite an education for me because I had no idea that diaphragms were spring activated. This book should immediately be added to all summer reading lists because I learned so much.
Oh, God.
Getting back to the lady doctor visit, let's just say in the attempt for a proper fit, these very tiny spring-loaded frisbees go ricocheting within the confines of the examination room walls. I laughed my way through this scene and felt lucky that I wasn't bopped in the head. As comical as this episode is, it's also real and revealing. It speaks to the state of women's choices and responsibilities then and today. The chapter wraps rather sadly. Dottie begins the book as an optimist, and she enjoys all Dick has to offer. However, equipped with her bag of her custom-fitted springy prophylactics, we find her sitting in a park bench in Washington Square that evening, waiting hours for Dick. And it is clear he stood her up. Dottie eventually ditches the diaphragm under the park bench, abandoning all hope for further lovemaking. Love plays no role in our next story with Pris Hartshorn. Pris's experiences as a new mom was shockingly realistic and metaphorically stunning to me. Look, I don't even have to tell you anything about Pris. Obviously, she's straight-laced and her heart will be shredded. Her poignant story takes place in the hospital on the maternity ward. She's married a doctor whose name is Sloan, but thinks he's B.F. Skinner. Meanwhile, our fragile Pris is suffering from postpartum. She's frightened and she's confused about breastfeeding versus the bottle. What is left of Pris's energy after a hard labor is being smothered and slain by her husband, Sloan, who is described as, quote, enamored by his own theories, which he wants to enforce like prohibition, regardless of the human factor, unquote. Like a washing machine spin cycle, advice flies in every direction. The nurses advise the bottle on a certain schedule. Her husband, the doctor, insists on breastfeeding on a different one. Meanwhile, Pris must be cleaned up with fresh lipstick and be pretty for visiting hours. Enter her mother, who has her own baby ideals, and meanwhile, everyone is smoking. Excruciating cries of the baby can be heard from the nursery while cocktails are being poured. Pris's dizzying, throbbing pain is mental, physical, and isolating, and masked by the expectations of all these groups. It's an amalgamation of oppressive contradictions. I'll just mention a few other members of the group so we can then learn about McCarthy's life and how the members are reflected in it. Polly Andrews is our Pollyanna, practical yet seeing the glass half full. Pokey Prothero, I just love these names, is goofy, but she manages to do all the right things in her clunky way. Noreen Schmidt-Lapp Blake Rogers, yes, definitely the divorcee in the group. I didn't like her. And depending on your sources, many critics don't even consider her a member of the group because she wasn't accepted as a roomie with the others at Vassar. So we'll reject her too and move on. Libby McCausland wants to break into the competitive publishing world. Does our Libby become liberated? Ultimately, yes. However, she's fired early in her career for botching an editing job, and her boss gives her some practical advice. Publishing is a man's business, Miss McCausland. Marry a publisher. Be his hostess. Ouch. But just when you think you're at your lowest, opportunity knocks, and lo and behold, she does secure a job as a literary agent. Moving on, I remember the pride of Helena as she donned a beautiful dress in anticipation of a date sure to end in a marriage proposal. I also recall her shame in revealing the night ended in pain, shock, and rape. Finally, to the group's North Star, Eleanor Eastlake, known as Lakey. Eleanor, I'm convinced because of Eleanor Roosevelt. Eastlake because she grew up in Chicago, I'm sure. Described as a cool, aristocratic, dark beauty with pale skin, black eyes, and large green eyes, after Pokey, she's the wealthiest. But she is not, as Sidney Lumet cast her in the film, Candace Bergen. Lakey spends most of the book in Europe studying art history and getting her doctorate. She only returns in 1940 when it's evident war is on the horizon. In Lakey's chapter near the book's end, we find our group at the pier ready to welcome Lakey back to the USA. Lakey disembarks from the gangplank, followed by her lover, the Baroness. Well, this certainly throws a wrench into our group's lunch plans. This is an incredibly progressive book, a social commentary scrutinized through an observant pen. Mary McCarthy's writing style is architectural, or like a documentarian. It's right up my alley because I love symmetry. Simple examples. The story opens at a church and ends at a church. For every lament, there's a witty reference. Contradictions about the roles of women are scrutinized through a prism of each group member. Most fail or settle. A few persevere. What does this failure say about our author, ourselves, and our society then and now? Becoming a housewife is both desired and dreaded as destiny. A higher education holds value, but really for what purpose? Imagine the contradictions of our Vassar-esque alumna of 33, at once expected to graduate and inspired by their intellectual views, go out and make a difference in the world, but having to constrain and smother those ambitions to become a happy housewife. The group presents the constant struggle between social veneer and the reality of life or the problem with no name. The group is about women, their relationships and expectations. In the 1920s, relationships were about frivolity and fun, a response to the horrors of World War II. But the 1930s cooled this frivolous, flapper, Gatsby world, aiming instead for earnest, meaningful relationships with personal fulfillment. Other themes revealed are the loss of identity and the search for a new one. Daughter, independent college graduate, wife, caregiver, mother, adulterer, friend, lover. And let's talk about the lovely men in the group. On second thought, let's not. Only 2 of the dozen or so are truly noble, and they're both connected, obviously, to our Polly Anna. You could say the group is more of a cautionary tale, the danger of overstepping society's limits, each character exploring the consequences of crossing that elusive line. Ultimately, McCarthy makes it clear the challenges of finding one's place in autonomy is hard, which begs the question, have we come a long way, baby? So now let's shift our biography to Mary McCarthy, beginning with her childhood in Seattle. Born in 1912, she had an idyllic childhood until the age of 6. 1918, both her parents died of the Spanish flu. She and her 3 younger brothers were orphans, sent to live with family in Minneapolis who pocketed funds intended to raise them. She also suffered physical abuse. So applying and getting accepted to Vassar was a vindication of her smarts and a means of escape. Despite her intelligence, though, she was never able to achieve what she most desired, belonging. She never felt accepted into the social elite in which she found herself. So to compensate, she relied on her intelligence to gain friends, but it didn't work. They came to her for tutoring or help preparing for a test. But other than that, she was never one of the gang. After graduation in 1933, she pursued a writing career, stints at The Nation, The New Republic, and at the Partisan Review, a communist paper. But by 1936, she rejected anything with a communist connection. Like in the group, war was looming. But writing for these publications served as a great incubator to hone her political views and writing style. It's the 1940s and 50s where Mary hit her stride. She began publishing novels and writing literary reviews, but all the while, the group was percolating. It took her 18 years to write the story. It's suffice to say that Mary's personal life was spicy, racking up, as my list mentioned, many marriages and affairs. What was happening while Mary was writing? 1 year before the group debuted, Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, coining the term, the problem with no name, that nagging dissatisfaction that lay at the heart of many women's experiences. Today, we understand the zeitgeist, but prior to Friedan, this oppressive melancholy was undefined. McCarthy and her characters in the group were not immune to this problem with no name. Personally, her second husband, the literary critic Edmund Wilson, refused to allow her to have her own bank account. He also had her committed to a psychiatric hospital against her will, claiming she was hysterical. And if you remember Kay Strong, our bride, she too lands in a psych ward. Today we would say gaslit by her herald with an A. And it's lab tech Polly Anna Andrews who advocates for her during her breakdown. You may be surprised to learn that the book burst onto the American scene when it was published. It was the 50 Shades of Grey of 1963, and rapidly became known as the book that everyone read without wanting to actually admit it. It went almost immediately to the top of the bestseller list because of its frank portrayals of sexuality, virginity, contraception, divorce, masturbation, lesbianism, free love, abortion, and mental illness. It was not Ozzie and Harriet. However, it wasn't only the subject matter. It was also the attitude that was appealing. The group revealed with a matter-of-fact style that nice girls were also adventurous and reckless. And by the way, love and sex don't automatically go together. You won't be surprised to learn it was banned in both Italy and Ireland. And wait 5 minutes and it will be banned here too, which will cost me to spawn an instant group readathon fundraiser. Why not? Test me. Back on track here, you'd think that Mary had now made her mark, that she'd indeed come a long way. However, the novel's popularity had unintended consequences that I would call the Thomas Wolfe curse. Wolfe, the author of Look Homeward Angel, learned it's not such a cracking idea to create characters that are caricatures of real people. In this case, his fellow Asheville residents. He could never go home again to his Arcadia. The mat was swept away, and the same thing happened here. Although readers loved the book because they picked up on the autobiographical elements, the real members of the group, Vassar 33 grads, were not impressed. They recognized themselves and they weren't happy. They were hurt. To them, Mary McCarthy's satirical tone seemed perilously close to naked contempt, as though, having failed to assimilate, she was now determined to retaliate. In the biography, Seeing Mary Plain, one former classmate said McCarthy was, quote, trying to make up for the fact that she felt socially inferior. The result? She was shunned, and I can understand it. They felt they'd been mercilessly pilloried in the book. By the way, the real life Harold with an A was McCarthy's first husband, Harold Johnsrud. He wasn't impressed either. McCarthy admitted that the book had indeed resulted from, quote, putting real plums into an imaginary cake, unquote. Thus, her success cemented her outsider identity that she'd been so keen to shed from the minute she stepped foot on Vassar's campus. And the shunning extended beyond the personal. The group's popular success did not impress her literary friends. They disparaged her bestseller as a superficial potboiler. Simply put, it was chick-lit. And who are these friends? Well, let's think for a moment about who's dominating the literary scene of the 1960s. This is not a male-bashing question. I am asking us to recognize the reality. Men question McCarthy's ability to be a professional writer. Surely McCarthy and Mitchell had a lot in common. I'll quote Norman Mailer, who describes McCarthy and the group. A trivial lady writer's novel infused with a communal odor that is a cross between McGrief and contraceptive jelly. I think that stinks, but he doesn't stop. Further, he says, her book fails as a novel by being good, but not nearly good enough. She is simply not a good enough woman to write a major novel. This makes your skin crawl. Mm-hmm. Mailer fails to see what McCarthy exposes in every chapter with every character. He was enraged by their submissiveness. He saw life was happening to them, and to him, it weakened the book. Duh. Sorry, Norman, but you missed the point. It is precisely this enforced passivity that McCarthy highlighted. Now, to be fair, another critique then and now of the group is enough with the detail already. Some people don't want to know about the angst of sofa fabric selection or cocktail ingredients. But I found great joy in hearing about kitchen curtains, apartment hunting, and dinette set purchases. Some people do put a lot of thought into paint colors. Plus, these are educated women. Is it any wonder that house cleaning techniques are examined in professorial terms? Socratic debate is applied to where to have lunch. Sexual experience followed the scientific method. Forgive Mailer. He lacks context. And despite his dismissiveness, the group remained on the bestseller list for 2 years. Later in life, McCarthy said, quote, "To be disesteemed by people you don't have much respect for is not the worst fate," unquote. Through all the personal and peer rejections, Mary continued to write, producing a total of 6 novels, 2 autobiographies, short stories, literary criticisms, books on travel, art, and politics, including Vietnam, Watergate, and the Shah of Iran. She also had an amazing correspondence with Hannah Arendt, who we'll learn more about in May. She gained a reputation as a debunker of the fashionable and the facile products of American culture. Today, scholars describe her work as extraordinarily authentic, indispensable. She's seen as a sharp observer of contemporary 20th century society. This CV would make anyone proud. However, shortly before her death, she revealed that the pain of the group was still raw, admitting to a newspaper the group had, quote, "ruined my life."
Oh my God.
This is hard to hear. By staying true to her astringent, critical, satirical style, she gifted us with the brand of social history. In the group, we unpack self-deception. We get up close with a privileged class. We feel the pressure of a generation of women who came of age between 2 world wars and we can't help but compare our life to theirs. Books about the expectations and conformity date back to the 13th century and focus on court behavior and courtly etiquette. In the 1700s, we had the novels of Jane Austen, followed by George Eliot, preceded Edith Wharton. Of course, Claire Booth Luce's excellent 1936 play, The Women. The group then paved the way for contemporary works that include Tom Wolfe's book, Bonfire the Vanity, the 2005 film, Mona Lisa Smiles, and the 2007 series, Mad Men. Perhaps you are now able to trace the undeniable connection that begins with Lakey, Pokey, and the rest, and connects us to Carrie, Samantha, Miranda, and Charlotte. Is the writer Carrie the 1998 incarnation of our Mary? Both stories told are bold, beloved, yet controversial. Have we come a long way, baby? To answer, here's some homework. Go back and binge on the 1998 to 2000 Sex and the City TV series, now that you've learned about the group, set in 1933 through 40 and published in 1963. Then let Cindy and I know if in 2023 you think we've come a long way. For now, let's let Sex and the City newspaper columnist and author Candace Bushnell have the final word. The group reminds us that not much really has changed.
Isn't that the truth? Okay. You know, Stacey, honestly, I didn't love the group, and I don't know whether it's because, you know, we're the beneficiaries of so much ground that they plowed, you know, that those women plowed. And,
yeah.
And I don't know. I have a book by Mary McCarthy. I think it's called The Stones of Florence. I think that's the name of it. Didn't she write that?
Yeah, it's one of her travel books. She loved
it. And it's supposed to be, someone gave it to me a long time ago. I hadn't read it in a long time, and it was so beautifully written. I guess I just didn't, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I just had a hard time with the book. But I don't think that, I like the way you incorporated her life, and then how the group opened the door for these other iterations of it, in terms of, I mean, without the group, there would be no Sex and the City, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, and what Candace Bushnell, who really, wasn't she the impetus for the Sex and the City? It was her book.
Yeah. And she does the introduction. This is the cover of the latest book, and she does the introduction for it. which I found fascinating and didn't know because I had an older version that has a different introduction. but I thought it rounds it off.
Yeah, the other thing, and maybe it's not supposed to be that. I mean, I really appreciated your analysis because I just didn't think it was that deep. That book, it just wasn't. It wasn't like Middlemarch or some of your other choices that have,
I saw it as so stinging, so deep, particularly Pris dealing with the pressures of, Pris is totally postpartum, totally.
Yeah.
And
that poor one, who was the one who is in the hospital at the end? And she kills herself, right?
Well, they leave it open-ended, but you don't know if it's Kay who begins the book. So we don't know if she fell out the window, she was spotting aircraft, or she commits suicide. And I'm sure I couldn't find it, but I bet you Mary McCarthy read Nella Larson's book Passing, because it's the same thing. By a window and we fall out. So it's debated. Yeah. But there is a character in the group I don't mention. And on my second or third reading of it, I thought, oh my God, how beautiful. Polly has a father who comes and moves in with her, and he has a lot of energy. He gets divorced later in life, and he's wants to build a new room onto her apartment, and he's up all hours of the night. And she and her boyfriend, John Rutledge, treat him with such kindness. And the first time I read the book, I thought, well, he's really nutty. The second time I read the book, I said, her father has bipolar 1. And then I found out about Mary's psychiatric episodes, and I thought, she understands. She knows these people. Once you're in this great club I'm in, you spot it, and then you're very sensitive to how it's treated. And she treats that relationship so tenderly and does all the right things. Like Polly has to call Macy's and say, look, if my dad comes in with this charge card, he's not allowed to use it. And that's what you have to do, because when they're manic, they'll spend all kinds of money. So I've been there, canceling the credit card. So with Jeffrey, so it was so beautifully handled. And when she's committed, Kay, that's exactly what happened to Mary McCarthy. And your husband could be responsible for checking you in and checking you out. Like you had no.
Yeah. I don't know. That was pretty powerful to me, that he was just so cold and uncaring. I mean, you wonder, why did they get married in the first? She just wanted to be married, right?
I think she just wanted to belong. Everywhere she goes, she wants to belong. She's orphaned.
There's so many people still like that,
Oh, yeah. They just want to be in the group. And it's pointless. Both Mary and Joan Mitchell, they are outsiders.
Right.
And when you said that about Joan, about her saying, I'm too French when I'm in America, I'm too American when I'm in France. You can't win. And then I'm a woman on top of it. So,
and yet, I mean, she had to have the steel trap mind and the constitution of a sailor, right? Because she
had to compete.
And then yet, just like every other human being, she craved love and attention.
Everyone wants love. Everyone wants that gaze. And something else about her that I wanted to interject, but I did not want to throw you off your game.
No. You can.
Okay, I want to go back to Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
Which, first of all, I think is a beautiful lake, just saying, from the Midwest. But anyway, you talk about this memory and this collective memory and the cerulean blue.
Right.
And that she paints from memory. I would argue that this is a very Jungian look at artistic expression because Jung talks about a collective memory and a collective, and she paints from memory. And we know full well that today none of the rivers that she mentions, including the ones in New York, are that beautiful blue. But at one time they were.
Yeah.
I think she pulls that from the collective memory.
That could be.
And that's her love for the cerulean, because that is the pureness of nature. It's from where we all come from. So beautiful.
Well, that's what I was trying to say about the purity and the honesty of her sensation. It's not, there's no pretense. There's no false. It's honest, and it's.
Would you consider it primal? Like, she draws from such a deep, like she's almost like drawing from the brainstem. Like, it's so.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly organic. I would call it organic.
Yeah, there you go. It's not influenced by anything except the collective experience.
She's influenced by art history, and she's influenced by specific artists. But that she says she doesn't like Monet. But then again, she paints just like him.
I mean, she's not listening to anyone to tell her what to do. She's feeling what to do, being influenced, whether she likes or not.
Right. But she's very complex. I mean, I really probably oversimplified her, but she's just, because she was a painter for almost 50 years. So she came back here to America to do a whole series of works on paper, small works. I mean, she did paint small, because Barry said, "Mom, did she ever paint small?" And I go, "Yeah, she did, but I'm not showing those because that's not what I mean, the most beautiful ones are the ones she did when she moved to Vitoy, when she just had all that, nature around her that she could soak up, and large scale. I mean, it's just so beautiful, Stacey. And maybe that's too, a lot of people don't like Monet because they think he's too pretty. I think
Really?
Joan Mitchell is pretty, but I think it's so dynamic and powerful. There's a monumentality to it. And I think there's a monumentality to late Monet too. You could sit in front of those those water lily paintings and lose yourself, just like you can lose yourself in front of Joan Mitchell.
Do you know how the like Frankenthaler, et cetera, the other women, how they responded to her work? I don't know if you mentioned that or no.
I think they were all so caught up in their own. I mean, they certainly supported each other. And Helen was from a very wealthy New York family. So she, and she had the benefit of Clement Greenberg, who was a majorly important art critic, and he had a crush on her.
Clement Greenberg, that was his name?
Pardon? Clement Greenberg, Jewish guy.
Uh-huh.
So, and she was too, by the way, Frankenthaler. But, and she was the most, she was considered the most successful at one point, because her works were, she took what Pollock did and she went in a different direction. She just stained her canvases and she left areas unprimed. I mean, he did too, but hers were just like veils of color. The brushwork wasn't quite as striking.
It doesn't look as angry to me.
Well, right. She didn't have to be. She didn't have to worry about her next meal, or she didn't have to live in a hovel like Joan. That she did at some point, But I think Joan was so angry at her family, and I think she was responding to a childhood that was so full of, you have to do this or you have to do that. Do you know what I mean?
It's just so bizarre that you have to choose. You can't enjoy all of it.
At 11. I mean, my God, I was playing Barbies and Betsy McCall.
Right.
But then in a way, it forced her to grow up quickly. But she didn't, clearly, she wanted to get as far away from that as she could, and she did. Yeah. They are similar, Mary McCarthy. I mean, Joan was depressed. Joan had abortions. Joan had multiple affairs. She had multiple affairs. When she was married to Barney Rossett, she had multiple affairs. I mean, and he knew it, but he still loved her. I mean, she had to be fun. She sounded like a lot of fun.
Yeah. It just seems like none of these people regarded marriage as anything sacred or serious.
Well, they were artists that they could get away with it, or writers. You know, they were of a different.
Yeah. They were the Bohemians.
Yeah.
You know, the Bloomsbury group offshoots.
But Mary McCarthy and Edmund Wilson. Who else was she married to?
That Jack guy and two other people. I only knew the Edmund Wilson name. I didn't know anyone else. But it does, I mean, marriage just is not an important part of their lives. Maybe it was a convenience, or maybe they were pregnant at the time and decided he's not working and I don't want to be a mother. Like, I don't know. But
did she have children?
Yeah, she had one son, and she actually wrote a book about mother-son relationships.
Did he survive her?
Yes.
Because Joan didn't have any children, but she was a mother. She was like a mothering influence to Riopel's children, and they really liked her and his grandchildren. But he was unfaithful to her too. So
the dog walker, you couldn't make that up.
No, I couldn't make that up. I couldn't make up any of this.
I thought dog walking was a new profession, but obviously
maybe not in Paris. Maybe not in Paris. Yeah, except this was in the toy. She was probably some young French, you know.
I can imagine her walking in the house and the dog's just sitting there. And she's like, I thought they were out for a walk. And then like going into the bedroom to change and going, oh, there was no walk.